Good morning. This is Tim Stewart. I'm president at Visual Decisions, and we're here today to talk about how to get the most from your Industry 4.0 investment. At Visual Decisions, we've been in the business of utilizing information from the shop floor to improve continuous improvement or customer operations since about 2002. We help our customers combine the smart factory with the lean factory to drive improvements to cost, throughput, and quality. Our customers have seen dramatic improvements such as 30% increases in OEE, 50% scrap reductions, and much more. So let's see how we go about that. To start off with, we'll talk a little bit about Industry 4.0 and what we mean when we talk about Industry 4.0 and the scope that we're discussing today. And then we'll go into how to get the most from that. So in terms of Industry 4.0, if you look at the figure over here on the right side from the World Economic Forum, there are a lot of different things that are part of Industry 4.0 as a whole. And what we're really focusing on as Visual Decisions are the things over on the left side, and primarily the things in this blue box here. So for us working with our customers, primarily we work with the industrial Internet of Things. We work with advanced analytics, machine learning and AI, augmented reality, and some other things, but those four are really the key factors that we work with. In terms of the potential value, when done correctly and when the adoption is there from the organization, there is a tremendous amount of value that can be had from Industry 4.0. And really focusing on those segments that I referred to shortly ago. And so with this huge opportunity, what really stands in the way the most? For us, what we have seen is that it's not the technology that's often the big hurdle. There can be issues getting data connected, the right data connected, getting that organized, creating the proper context within the visuals and things like that. But those can all be done in a relatively straightforward manner. What really kind of hangs things up is more the cultural adoption. And the example of this that I use all the time that is pretty easy to relate to is Fitbit is a great example of an IoT device. I've been wearing one on my wrist since 2013. And unfortunately, in those 8 years, I haven't lost any weight. In fact, I've, put on a few pounds. And the fault does not lie with the Fitbit. The Fitbit works great. I've gone through a number of them hoping that it'll automatically cause me to lose weight. It hasn't yet. But they do a great job. They have advanced sensors. They can collect the raw information. They push that information to a cloud-based application. There's machine learning and artificial intelligence there to take that raw data and turn that into footsteps and heartbeats and so forth. And then there's nice pretty charts and graphs that tell me how much I have exercised, what I've been eating, and all those different things. And that's all fantastic information, but if I don't change my behaviors, if fundamentally I don't do something differently tomorrow than what I'm doing today, then I'm not going to see the value from that Fitbit. And it's the exact same things with these technologies that you're putting on the manufacturing floor. You fundamentally have to do something differently tomorrow in your operations than you do today in order to get the benefits that you're looking for. And so what we look at with our customers from kind of a path to success is to have that vision in the first place. How are you actually going to derive value from what you're doing? And if you already have that in place, that's great. We'll work from that. But if you don't have that in place, if you don't have that connection to value, what we'll work with you on is creating that map between what are the things that you're trying to achieve, what are the root causes for that current level of performance, and then what can we put in place that directly impacts those root causes for the current performance so that you can have a great degree of confidence that you're going to get the value that you're hoping for. And a large part of that is, over here on the right side. It's not necessarily just the technology itself, but what are the business process changes that you need to put in place in order to take advantage of those technologies? How are you going to change something as simple as a shift stand-up meeting? How are you going to run that to take advantage of the data that you'll have from the shop floor? How do you change how the quality department does their work so that you can actually get those quality gains that you're looking for? How do they change the way that they do things so that they can take advantage, or so that they look at this data that's coming from the process? And really, to do that, what we're going to look at is how do you leverage the existing investments that you have out there today? How do you take the data that you already have and make better use of that within your process? What do we need to put in place to fill the capability gaps that you have out on the shop floor? And then really, how can we integrate across different processes as kind of a last step to address something like warranty, where you may have a warranty database of things that are getting repaired, that are out in the field, but that might not be tied back into manufacturing to show for the things that are ending up in warranty, what was happening with those as they were going through the manufacturing process. And going back even further, how can we pass that information to engineering and make use of that within engineering so that they can make products that are easier to manufacture that don't end up in warranty later on. So throughout that whole process, at every single step, we have to look at the culture and the process to say, how do we really embed this into the standard work practices that we have, not just for the operators, but for all of the support staff and the leadership as well. So really focusing in on that adoption and how we change the process and so forth. Who are the people that need to change? And the focus is always on the shop floor. And it's the operators, it's supervisors, production management. What are they going to do differently? How are they going to enter information? How are they going to use that? What are the visual controls that we can put in place out on the shop floor and things like that? But don't forget the support teams as you're doing this. So manufacturing engineers, the continuous improvement team, quality, maintenance and facilities, really everybody needs to be looking at this data, but first and foremost, management has to embrace and lead that change. Where I've seen the most success with my customers is where for instance, the plant manager holds daily meetings and has people come in and has a big screen TV right there in his office, and he will lead people kind of through that and ask them what happened at this particular time where we see this blip occurring. And by people knowing that he is keeping an eye on that data, he's looking at that, he's actually utilizing that to see what's happening within the operation, they will be looking at that data and utilizing that as well. And so that cultural change of embracing that technology, embracing that information, and utilizing that within each day, if it's driven from the top, it's going to be most successful. But why is my PowerPoint not advancing? The ultimate answer is everyone. So in order for this to be most successful, anybody that is involved with production at all, whether it's in a supporting role or not in a supporting role, or direct production, everyone should be involved in either entering this information, consuming this information, and looking at how they can do things better based on having this more granular picture of what's happening within the facilities. How much change is required? And I love this quote from Michelangelo, that the greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. And this has been driven home for me a number of times working with different facilities. There's one customer that I've worked with that was a plastic injection molding company. And I visited 2 plants for this customer that had very much the same background, making very similar products and so forth. And one plant had fantastic OEE, one of the better ones that I've seen out in industry, and the other plant was struggling quite a bit. And they were only 15 miles apart. The workforce was composed of a lot of the same sources of people and so forth. And when I talked to the successful plant manager, he really said that the biggest difference in operations between the 2 plants was that for a number of years he had been striving for that perfection, and looking for any opportunity to make any improvement whatsoever, no matter how small it seemed at the time. And over the years, those small changes just accumulated and helped them get to the point where they had such an excellent track record. So another facet of this is it's often difficult to determine how to get started. And if you want to run a pilot, or if you want to do a whole plant or a line, or how do you want to go about this. And my advice is start small, so that you can prove out the technology, feel confident that it's going to do what you want it to do, but then go big. And an analogy that I use for this is that you won't cool off if you just dip your toe in the water. And the story that I tell here is that I worked with a customer where they implemented this on one machine, and they wanted to see for that machine, were they going to get significant improvement in performance. Well, the software did exactly what it was supposed to do. It gave them all of the information about downtime. It gave them predictive capabilities around maintenance and things like that. The problem was that since it was only on one machine, all of the people involved were spread out across multiple machines within that department. Maintenance was involved across the entire plant and so forth. And so they could see that the technology worked, but they weren't getting the improvements that they were expecting from that machine. And I tried to explain to them that the reason they weren't getting the improvement was that nobody was really changing what they were doing as a result of that data. The application was essentially just a black hole for them, where information was going in, but nobody was really looking at that information to utilize it to improve the process. And so what started as just a technology proof of concept really hit this roadblock because of the fact that nobody had incorporated that data into how they do business. And so again, if you just dip your toe in the water, you're not going to cool off at the pool. At some point, you have to jump in, and you have to make this part of what people do and how they do it. So what's really standing in the way? And one thing that's standing in the way is people's reaction to change. And very often when you introduce these things into your organization, you'll meet some resistance. And really the most common reaction is, I already have a ton of stuff to do. How do you expect me to now do this as well? How do you expect me to take this information and go into these reports and analyze those and fix what they're telling me and so forth? And there's ways to go about that. And so in order to address all of those different objections, you have to have the vision and the strategy. You have to communicate that very effectively. Leveraging what people already know is another thing here, and utilizing visual controls, creating the management operating system, and I'll get more into these as I go. So in terms of the vision and the strategy, starting off again with that business case, this is kind of how we at Visual Decisions break things down. is, what is it that you're trying to achieve in the overall business within that plant, et cetera. And then, what are the impediments to that performance? Why are you seeing the results that you're getting? So doing some form of root cause analysis, even if it's not all the way down to the root cause, what we're looking for is something that's actionable, something that we can take action against. And once we've seen that, then we can start to look at, what are the different enablers that can be provided by these Industry 4.0 systems? And then what are the business capabilities that we can build on top of that? And that comes back to those process changes and cultural changes that I talked about earlier, where it's not just putting the technology in and expecting everything to get better. It's, how do we change the way that the quality department does the work? How do we change the way that we run a Kaizen event and so forth to take advantage of this data? And by putting those business capabilities in place, those are the things that will actually address those root causes for performance and lead to the benefits and outcomes that we're hoping for. So once you have that vision, once you have that plan in place, then you have to communicate it clearly, because one thing that often happens is if the path forward isn't clear to everybody, if they don't know how this is going to impact them, they don't know what are the changes that they're going to be expected to make, then the natural thing is to rebel against that change, to resist it. And then that obviously makes things much more difficult. So if we can let people know, what are the things that they're going to be doing differently in the future and how that's actually going to be easier or better for them, then usually you can get people to come along. So in terms of leveraging what people already know, what we don't want to do is rip and replace all the systems that they have out there already. And so, if they're already doing things that work, that's great. Let's leverage those. If you already have systems in place like a SPC system or an ERP system or MES or whatever it might be, that's great. Let's figure out how we can leverage that most successfully, in addition to identifying those gaps and closing those gaps for the additional data that you need to collect. But if we can let people know that we're not changing everything, that there's still things that they do today that are going to be the same going forward, that usually eases things too, because we're letting people know that we're not expecting them to change everything at one time. So, when we look at that existing data that's out there on the shop floor, everybody has some. The real key is, how do we leverage it more effectively, and how can we, connect that existing data to the value? And so part of it is whatever data we have today, how can we utilize that to understand where the performance is falling short? How can we utilize that to understand what are those root causes for performance today? And then if we can make that more visible, if we can tie that better into our processes, can we respond to issues more quickly than we do today? And can we make things more visual to utilize the Hawthorne effect? The Hawthorne effect is, people behave differently when they're being watched. When you're driving down the highway and you see a policeman, you tend to slow down. So, how can we utilize that on the shop floor to make improvements as well? And, really, we've done, implementations where customers had very little data to start with. This, interface was built on really just 4 or 5 pieces of data where we had, what amount was planned for each SKU, what was actually made. And, from that, we can determine, what our schedule adherence was and, where we really had issues following the plan. And what that gave us was at least some idea of where our problems were, what were the problem areas within the plant that could not meet schedule. And then we go and drill into why and, put additional, data collection systems in place there so that we could, get to that next level of information. In terms of visual controls, manufacturing has really embraced technology, where you have all of these lasers and robots and cobots and all kinds of different things that seemed futuristic 15, 20 years ago. But continuous improvement still uses an awful lot of whiteboards and manual pasteboards and paper reports that get put up there, printed off from Excel and so forth. And so there's a lot of opportunity to modernize the visual controls that we have out on the shop floor and really utilize those to get a higher level of engagement and analysis and really expand the capabilities of the people beyond going up there and writing a number on the board. But how do I take that information that's collected automatically and now utilize that to improve the process? We want to build the skills of the people, not just automate the easy parts. And then obviously we want to be data driven. This is Industry 4.0. It's the whole point of this process is to become more data driven and build that culture around being data driven and utilizing the data to inform where we need to go to make things better and how we do so. Another factor when implementing these systems is that the performance metrics should align to the process. So whether you're doing TPM, total productive maintenance, or total quality management, Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, and so forth, focusing on OEE, the information that you're collecting should tie into these different processes that you have for operational excellence. And the measures, the visual controls that you're putting out on the shop floor, everything else should align with how you're going about the improvements. And also, we'll spend a whole webinar on this next week, but there should be a continuous focus on value. As you're collecting this information, anything that you can do to contextualize this information with cost can really help people understand why this is so critical for improvement. If you have non-conforming material and you're pulling off however many things that need rework on a daily basis, when you just see a number of items that need rework, that may not mean much to people. But if you can show how much that's actually costing the operation, then that can be significantly more impactful. The Lean Industry 4.0 management operating system, this is something that can be worked towards. It's not something that has to be done right away. But where companies have done policy deployment or Hoshin Connery, and you have these things in place already where you are taking the high level objectives of the corporation and breaking that down across the different layers of the organization to what are the KPIs, what are the initiatives that we need to put in place at the lower levels. That can be done through systems now where you are actually collecting that data directly from the source, at the machines and so forth. And you can now be in real time reporting, against those KPIs so that people can see where they're at on a daily basis. You can use those in your weekly cadence calls and, your stand-up meetings and everything else so that you can always be, targeted and focused on, what are those things that you're trying to do to improve the operation and, get those visible to people on a daily basis so that you can keep that focus and keep those improvements happening. Again, I talked about transforming operational excellence earlier, but in order to utilize this information and so forth, you have to tie the data and the capabilities into your improvement process and how you go about your operational excellence process. And everything from the visual controls that we've talked about quite a bit, standard work for people on the shop floor, but also the standard work for leaders, making Gemba as you walk the floor more effective. How can I actually see what's happening, not just from is that machine up and or down that's in front of me, but how much has it been running today, and how many pieces has it produced? Is it at pace? What are the different things that have caused it to go down, et cetera? And then, from the toolkit itself, in terms of being able to do the root cause analysis or value stream mapping, or something like an FMEA, process FMEA or product FMEA, being able to utilize the data that we have coming from the process in order to automate those things is going to help us, significantly improve. Every step of a typical Kaizen process can be improved using this information. And I've got deep dive presentations where I go through, how to go about that process as well. So, reach out to me at the end of the presentation if you want more information there. From, a root cause analysis point of view, however you go about that within your organization, whether it's something as simple as looking at when these problems occur, who's running the process, what are we making, when does it occur, where within the operation is it happening, et cetera, or doing 5 whys or an Ishikawa diagram, or doing graphical evaluation, doing an FMEA, going to the statistical analysis factors like an ANOVA or a design of experiments, or anything like that. Being able to utilize that data will significantly improve that root cause analysis, and having those additional details and level of granularity really enables a lot of that analysis to be much more data-based instead of guesswork. I've talked a little bit about standard work for leaders, but really this is, getting, into those daily processes. How do you have the, production management? How do you have quality management and everybody else looking at the information and making that part of what they do every day in order to really, manage the process more effectively? And we talk a lot about standard work, on the shop floor, but standard work for leaders is something that more organizations should at least strive to incorporate. And making that as data-based as possible is certainly something that's going to be beneficial. Daily accountability processes, this will vary at different levels of the organization and different departments within the organization, but being able to have those daily accountability processes, weekly, monthly checklists, essentially, that these are the things that we're doing on a regular basis, are going to help significantly. And in terms of management pursuing these things, love the quote from Gandhi: "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." So if you're going to expect people on the shop floor to become more data-based, you should embrace that as well. What else can be done to drive success with Industry 4.0? You have to look across different time horizons. So, within a given shift, as, equipment fails or things go down, or you have, critical resources that are starved or blocked or something like that, being able to identify those things and respond to them in real time so that you can not only address your mean time between failure, but your mean time to repair and your first time fix rate and things like that. Those are absolutely critical to be able to have that fast response time. But then as we look across different time horizons like days, weeks, and months, what are the big issues within the plant, and how do we get visibility to those chronic issues that are causing us a lot of problems? And it's not just the big events where our equipment is going down for hours at a time. It might be something where it's only going down for 45 seconds at a time, but it's going down 20 times a day for 45 seconds at a time. And that just accumulates over time and has, sometimes you don't get to it right away. And so that 45-second downtime is now a 6-minute downtime. And those are things that we can look at once we aggregate this data, and we can do that analysis to say where those big problems are, what are the big levers that we can pull to really improve the operations the most. The example I love to give for implementing permanent solutions all the time is I was working at a shampoo facility, and they had a packaging line, and at the filler would stop on a regular basis because it was starved of bottles, and the bottles were coming on this overhead feed. And what would happen is, as the bottles were coming down that feed, they would go around this turn, and sometimes they would tip and fall. And the operator had to first of all be aware that the filler had stopped. They were responsible for the entire line, and so they had to make their way back to the filler. Then they would automatically look up, see where the problem was. They would grab a broomstick and they would poke at the bottle until it cleared, and then the feed would resume, and the filler would start back up, and the line would resume operation. And when I talked to the operator and I talked to the supervisor, they said, well, that's just the way that the line works. And there's this mindset of accepting these minor disruptions that happen many, many times a day. And rather than poking at things with a broomstick to clear that jam, what we should be doing is looking at what is causing those bottles to fall, and how do we address that problem. Gemba, going to where the work happens. I'm talking about IoT systems where you can have that visibility from Brazil, but it's something where you still need to actually go out, and the data telling you that, hey, the filler stopping because the bottle feed is running dry, tells me to go out and watch the machine to see why that bottle feed is stopping. But I still have to go out there to see, okay, as it's coming around that one turn, the bottles will occasionally fall, and that's what the problem is. So you still have to go out and actually observe the process as well. And finally, execution it's a good book. It's not the be all end all, but there's a quote from there that rings true for me, which is that we don't think ourselves into a new way of acting, we act ourselves into a new way of thinking. And what I mean by that is that we're not going to sit here and intellectually say, oh, we should be doing all of these different things, and that's going to change the culture of the organization. What will change the culture of the organization is to actually go in there, change the process, change the daily accountability structure, change the standard work and so forth, and make sure that that's done on a daily basis, and those actions actually take place every day. And that's what's going to change the culture of the organization to become more data driven, to actually embrace these technologies and get the most from them over time. So with that, I want to thank you. There's a ton of other information I have on the different elements that I've touched on, not just the Kaizen, but pretty much all of these different slides have multiple presentations that I've done. So please reach out to me at tim@visualdecisions.com or my phone number there, and let me know what you're interested in, and we can walk through additional details there. So with that, thank you, and hope you're here next week when we'll talk about how to actually look at the dollarization of all this and how you manage your real-time cost variances within your plant. Thanks.